Hey there, my name is Cole Adams, and you are watching the best college basketball podcast out there that covers the entire sport of college basketball, brackets, bubbles, and bid stealers. Now, here are your hosts, Sam Fetterman and Jonathan Lidskin.
Season 5, Episode 86 of Brackets, Bubbles, and Bit Stealers. I am Sam Fetterman. That is Jonathan Lidskin. Jonathan, we only have 3 episodes left this season.
Yeah, I mean, how about it? Today, Saturday, and
Saturday, the first ever in-person episode of Brackets, Bubbles, and Bit Stealers.
yeah, how about that? And then, of course, the season finale. Got
Yes.
really close to 90 episodes this year.
Yeah, we're going to finish up at 80.
And that doesn't include the season previews, does it?
It does. It does.
It does. Okay.
I included the season previews this year.
Okay. I remember us not including number episodes for.
Yeah, but we're going to do a lot more season previews next year, but we have a guest, and it's kind of been rude for me to not introduce him yet because it is the great Rocco Miller. Rocco, thank you for joining us live from San Antonio, where I will be starting tomorrow night at 11:53 p.m. Central Time.
Great to join you guys, and can't wait to get you down here. It's really humid and hot these last couple days. I think it's going to drop significantly by the time you arrive, so you won't have to deal with that. But it's always a good vibe when the Final Four is about to commence. It's a little interesting with all 4 number 1 seeds. I'm sure we're going to dive into that, but good to be back with you guys.
Yeah, and that is kind of the first thing I want to dive into. Jonathan and I discussed that at length on Sunday. But Rocco, what you're the mid-major guy. Like that's your thing. But this really does have to excite you though, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the way I look at it is each year I figure by the time we get to March, and I cover a regional each year. Sam, you and I were in New York together a couple of years ago, so I think you're aware of that. But I look at each season as a journey, and I think the best stories are in the non-power leagues, and we have a good 3-4 months to travel the country, see as many of these teams and leagues as possible. At least that's my goal. And I know as we get into the heart of bracketology, which is most of February and of course early March, most of those teams are no longer in the conversation. So you got to get them early. And of course, the more of those we can get into those conversations, the better. But I accept reality. And I think this year was a little bit of a stronger dose of reality. The fact that UC Irvine was not even listed by the committee in the next 4 teams out. I had a feeling they weren't getting in, but to not even see them listed is a little bit of a stain on my heart for a team that won that many games away from home, including a win at UC San Diego, a team that was inside the bubble. But I think as we went through the tournament, the way that the sport just works now, I mean, it's evolved year in and year out. And at this point, if you're on any of these 4 teams that made the Final Four and you're like the 11th guy, you're probably the highest paid guy still in Conference USA or the Sun Belt. So you have to understand that. So the gap, I guess, between the top and the next best and then the middle is continuing to widen. Those numbers show up on places like Ken Palm when you see Auburn and everybody above them at 35 net rating points. And even the next closest team, Tennessee, is a full 5 points behind. So even at the highest level, these 4 separated themselves pretty clearly. And with the exception, I think, of Florida, didn't have a major point in the tournament where you thought they were dead. Houston did have to get a game-winning basket, obviously, but either winning or tied or near tied in that game. Florida was kind of dead in the water twice and recovered. So, yeah, I mean, it's really not that surprising, and I'm appreciating the journey for what it is.
Rocco, the other kind of thing about these games are these players, these coaches, a lot of them came from mid-major schools. You've known Todd Golden for a long time. I've known Walter Clayton Jr. for a long time. How cool is it to see these guys that you've known since they were playing in these 600-seat gyms, play in front of 80,000 people at 65,000 people at the Alamo Dome on Saturday?
Yeah, I mean that's really cool, especially with Todd's situation. I basically, for him, it's a formula for in a lot of ways, both basketball wise, but also like talent evaluation and roster construction wise, that he completely went all in on. Back during his time as a San Francisco assistant coach, maybe even a little bit as a Columbia assistant coach, and I certainly learned things about how to run a program in the SEC during his 1 year at Auburn. So I think he did a phenomenal job preparing himself to be a head coach, even though he was still very young. And at San Francisco, I think one of the things he realized as well was build an outstanding staff full of strategists and thinkers and have a roster full of high IQ players that can do multidimensional things, whether it's defending, playing great offense, getting along with each other off the court. All those things matter in his program, and that goes back to the Don's days under him. And it's all carried over to Florida. I think Florida does not spend, even in the top 5 or 6 teams in the SEC, middle of the pack at best. And a lot of their players, like you said with Walter Clayton, started at mid-major or below levels. And that's been really cool about the story too, because I think they all checked their ego at the door when they decided to be a Gator. Elijah Martin, of course, even though he came from Florida Atlantic, was a highly sought after portal get, but some of the players already had good relationships with him, like Will Richard, that really helped drive the decision to bring Martin in. So that's the cool thing I think about Todd Golden is he's a very analytically driven guy, but he also he trusts his guys a lot, and the players have a lot of input even on roster decisions, like bringing Martin in over the offseason. So yeah, in his case, it's great. Obviously, Samson and Pearl have been through all sorts of journeys. Pearl most notably at Milwaukee for his barbecue and getting the Panthers to the Sweet 16 as a 12 seed. And then obviously Shire, a little bit different because little bit kind of groomed up through the Duke side of things in the NBA, but still very impressive to get to the Final Four at his age.
For sure. And then the last thing before we kind of dive into this, as you kind of alluded to, these aren't the top NIL spenders in the country. Duke is obviously up there,
Right.
And Auburn spends a lot, but not quite as much as some of the other teams in the SEC. Florida and Houston are not quite up there with Auburn and Duke, but they still do spend a lot. It just shows that the money that you put into this is not the only thing that matters at the end of the day. Alabama, I would say, spent more than all of these teams. Mississippi spent a ton. Those teams made good runs, but at the end of the day, you have to get the talent evaluation right, you have to get the fit right, and you have to get the coach right. And not saying those guys didn't get that right, but for these 4 teams, it worked better than anyone else.
Yeah, I would agree. Obviously, Duke's probably the one exception with just an abundance of talent they brought in. Tyrese Proctor is really the only major returnee from last year, but the other 3 teams in the Final Four, I think, had at least 65% returning minutes. So not only being able to get them initially, but to keep them there and them wanting to come back is kind of the trickier and harder thing to do these days. So that just goes to show you that they've got stability in the program, things going on, in the locker room, outside of basketball, that make players want to stay for more than 1 year, which of course is rare at a lot of places. And I think the other thing it says too, Sam and Jonathan, is that once you're spending at a high enough level, you don't have to be the highest spender. You really just need enough to be competitive, and you can build the kind of roster that will work and gel, long term for either the season or into, if you have a 2-year plan, which I know with a lot of these guys, Florida looked at it as a 2-year plan. And Houston, I know with LJ Cryer, for example, they felt good about getting him for 2 years as well when he came over from Baylor. So there's numerous examples of that. And obviously Auburn keeping Broome as long as they have has been a huge part of them succeeding. So yeah, I think if you're not going to be like an elite Duke level recruiting team, or just an Alabama Ole Miss type of team that just has endless resources, that's another way that you can succeed, and they've proved it.
Jonathan, anything to add to this conversation before we kind of dive into the games themselves?
Yeah, I just think, kind of like Rocco said, I don't think that there's one good recipe in this whole thing. Like, you can spend a lot and, be a bad team. Like we saw with
Kansas State
and Indiana, and,
hey, Indiana almost made the tournament.
Even like Arkansas for a stretch. Arkansas was a top 5 spender and, barely made the tournament. We're definitely on the bubble at one point.
I forgot to mention Arkansas.
Yeah,
Right.
I still think that at the core, roster building is still about fit. It's still about your system. And, there are more than one way for each team to kind of make it work and do what, these teams have that are in the Final Four. Even in an individual system, I think there's more than, one way to make it work. But Sam, yeah, kind of like we talked about, I still think this Final Four shows how important roster building still is.
I don't think roster building has ever not been important. I think it's the most important thing. And I think that this is clear. That this is made extremely clear by everything in the in this NCAA tournament so far. Let's dive into the games themselves. Let's start. We've got a couple really fun ones coming up. On Saturday, we are 2 full days in between now and then, but I think we're about 90. I don't want to do the math on how many hours away we are. It's too many, but we're getting there. We're getting there. And Jack Church will join us after Rocco's done to talk women's Final Four because he knows more than we do. But San Antonio, Auburn, Florida, first game of the night. Jonathan, what is the first thing that you're looking for in the first 5 minutes of this game that will tell you anything for the rest of the game?
Well, I think as explosive as these offenses are, I think the first thing I'm looking for is, like, can any of these teams just set the tone right away with how they shoot the ball? Like, does any team come out hot? Because, we have seen at times in this tournament and throughout the season, both Auburn and Florida can bury teams with a kill shot. Florida did it to get to the Final Four in the late stages against Texas Tech. Auburn did it to get back into the game against Michigan when they were trailing. I think, Florida, Sam, you and I have talked about this. They hit 13 threes in the jungle earlier this year.
13 threes against Auburn earlier this year. The only time in the regular season that Auburn allowed double-digit threes was against Florida, and it was 13.
Yeah, so I think if any team, like, very simply can come out hot and knock down a couple threes in the opening minutes to start to build a lead, I think that could be really important here.
Rocco, what are you looking for in the first 5 minutes?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'm going to put a lot of stock in the first 5 minutes. Of course, when they played in the jungle, after 10 minutes, Auburn was up 5, and then Florida went on a crazy run, and it was really never the same after that. That could happen at any time. It could happen in the first 5 minutes. It could happen at the start of the second half. It could happen before halftime. And it goes both ways. Could be Auburn making the big move and suffocating Florida and getting them to miss a bunch of threes. It could go either way. So I'm mainly just looking to see how comfortable body language wise these teams are. Auburn made the Final Four back in Minnesota in 2019. None of these guys were part of that. So it'll be there for the players, it'll be their first time out there. Obviously, Florida's new to all of it. I don't think either of these teams have played in a dome before, even though the Alamo Dome is probably a little bit more friendly than the traditional NFL dome stadium. So for me, it's just more just kind of like, what is their body language saying? I think the fact that they're from the same league, especially from Auburn's standpoint, maybe a little bit of a revenge factor. I don't think they liked being beat on national TV in prime time by Florida in a game where Elijah Martin didn't even play. They should have a chip on their shoulder coming in. But otherwise, I'm just looking forward to a great game with a lot of different chess moves because these teams do know each other so well. As I mentioned earlier, Todd Golden worked for Bruce Pearl for a year. They don't like the idea of playing against each other, but the fact that it's in the Final Four, I think they're both pretty okay with this one. One of them is moving on to the championship game. So, yeah, I think it's going to be a tremendous battle for several reasons.
All right. Florida, Auburn, the last time these two played, as Rocco mentioned, Florida went on that big run late in the first half. What do you think is the key to making that type of run again, aside from just making shots if you're the Gators?
Well, yeah, from my perspective, I still think the Gators have a little bit of a front court size advantage, despite the fact that Broom's just in a ridiculous rebounder, and obviously they're getting great production, at least in the Michigan win from Cardwell, and those guys are beasts for sure. But I think the fact that Florida can throw four guys at you, between Chinyelu, Han Lockton, and Howe and Condon. They've been really successful, not only in this tournament, but throughout the year in wearing other front lines down. I think that became a little bit of a factor in the jungle as well. So I'm certainly looking for that to free up some of those shots and make those shots become open at a certain point. They're also very effective playing kind of like that high-low game with both Condon and Howe at the top of the key. We saw during that, feverish rally to beat Texas Tech, the pick and pop working big time to get the double team drawn by Clayton and then kick it over to Howe, who can bury you from the wing spot from three. So there's a lot of different ways Florida can generate threes. They're also offensive rebounding monsters. So, Auburn has their work cut out. They're going to have to get great play from Chad Baker-Mazara, who was great in the Michigan State win. They had, like I said, Cardwell played great against Michigan, but didn't have his best game against Michigan State. So just consistency across the board. I think that's what Auburn's been fighting against in the month of March. They obviously started the month slow with 3 losses and started to right the ship here lately. But don't forget, they were down 9 against Michigan before they really started clicking back into gear.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I think, Texas Tech found some success backing down Darian Williams in that game against Florida. Now, part of that was, Alex Condon being hurt. Certainly didn't help the Gators. But I think, Auburn is different in that they don't really have, like, a guy like Darian Williams that is smaller but still strong enough to, like, back you down. They are more, spread the floor. Guys will hit shots on the perimeter. You have obviously your athletic guys at the rim and Cardwell and Chaney Johnson. They're more, not individual shot creation type, which is like, weird to say based on watching Auburn in the last, half a decade under Bruce Pearl. But, the way Auburn plays offense, I think that if they are moving the ball well and not trying to play one-on-one, they're going to have a lot of success. I don't know if, on the defensive end, Florida hitting 13 threes again is something you can count on. So I think on like the Florida side of things, you might have to get Howe to hit a couple threes like he did in that Texas Tech game. You might have to, attack with other guys from the perimeter. I don't know if you're going to get like a ton of, success going into the low post with Condon against that Auburn interior defense. Like Broom is a good rim protector. We obviously know how good Dylan Cardwell has been defensively. So it just like kind of Rocco said earlier, it's such an interesting chess match. And it's even more intriguing to me that these two teams are from the same conference and are so familiar with each other already.
Yeah, I like it. These two only played once this year. And we mentioned that game. I think Walter Clayton Jr. is playing his best ball of his entire career right now at the perfect time. Senior year NCAA tournament. What better time is there to be playing your best basketball of your career? And I just think that his shot making late in games, there's not a player in the country that has been more clutch over the last month than him. He's been handling the ball. This is a guy who was an off guard for the first 3 years of his career. He's slid over to the point guard spot and has just completely took over everything for Florida. He's at the controls and he's been ridiculous. I think for the Gators to win this game, they're going to need a big Walter Clayton performance because, that's how they got here. They got here because Walter Clayton's been stepping up and playing at that next level. And if they're going to do it on this stage, they're going to do it on his back.
Yeah, I'm with you, Sam. It was pretty clear, just being there in San Francisco up close for a couple games, the last 2 games they played, when things get tight, Walter Clayton runs the show. I don't even think there's a lot of coaching that goes into that at this point in the season. I could see him visibly look up at the scoreboard, when it got bleak there for a little bit, down 9, down 10 in the Texas Tech game specifically. And he kind of just knew what he needed to do and how much time he had. He was very under control. I was really impressed by, just the way he managed those moments and really just stayed cerebral about, how to manage each possession when they need to make their move, almost like a chess player would. And when he got double teamed, he trusted his teammates. When the shot was there, he found it. That's the really impressive thing I think about Florida is that I feel like the coaches are probably more nervous than the players in these moments. You saw it in the UConn turnaround and certainly in the Texas Tech turnaround. So it's an interesting team because I love everybody on the staff. They're all at certain level a friend of mine, and they do a tremendous job. But these players, like they trust them to just own these moments, and man, they really have succeeded in those two really tight, almost bleak games that they've had to survive.
Yeah, I've called Florida the second best staff in the country, behind UConn. They will not be the second best staff in the country for long because they are losing 2 assistants to being head coaches. Kevin Hovey,
maybe three.
Where's Hartman getting?
Well, we don't know yet, but there's a couple he's in the mix for, a couple that aren't even open yet. So just stay tuned.
I'm excited to meet Kevin Hovey this week.
He's great.
He's going to be the Columbia head coach.
He is wonderful.
I'm not sure if I'm going to take time out to meet John Andrzejczyk because he's not coming to my coverage region, but he does a great job. Hartman does a great job. Everyone on this Florida staff does a great job, but they have been thoroughly outcoached twice so far in this NCAA tournament. Does that concern you, Jonathan?
Not really. Like, I'd take this Florida staff, like you said, up against anyone. I don't think
the two staffs they've gotten outcoached by might be the first and third best staffs in the country.
Like Texas Tech and UConn both have really good staffs.
Matt Brower going to Stephen F. Austin. Jeff Linder was the head coach.
Like, if they get outcoached in the Final Four, specifically in their matchup versus Auburn, I would say it's much more, the fact that Auburn has been super well coached this year, and Auburn knows Florida very well because they played them already this year. Like, I don't think it has anything to do with Auburn coming out with a significantly better scout or anything like that. But Bruce has been fantastic this year. They run great stuff. It's a tough team to guard. I don't think that there is a huge coaching gap here between the staffs or the head coaches individually that would point one way or another.
Rocco?
Yeah, Florida Auburn, I agree. There's not a huge discrepancy there. I think these are player-driven programs where the talent is great and they both trust this talent. Now we saw Bruce Pearl freaking out a little bit when Broom left for a few minutes with his elbow issue or ankle issue, but I think that's more just to try to keep his guys locked in and not foul and just basic coaching reminder things. I do think that Florida was very strategic. I need to write an article on this still, but the foul they had in the down 9 when they fouled, I believe it was Toppin, who's a 65% or so free throw shooter. He, of course, missed the front end of a 1-and-1. The other one, I'm not sure if they fouled the right guy, but they got Darian Williams to miss also a front end of a 1-and-1, and that's how you snap your fingers and go from down 9 to down 3 in those moments. That was intentionally done by the staff. Those are traditional Todd Golden hallmarks. I was at the 2022 amazing game when they fouled Yoli Childs, a 59% foul shooter, the best player for BYU, in a tie game. And sure enough, he missed the free throw to give San Francisco final possession, and they won the game. So they've been doing those types of things way different than other staffs. So in a lot of ways, there is some genius to these Gator decisions that are driven by the coaches. But beyond that, I think these are player-driven programs at this point for the majority of the game, at least. And really no major edge coaching-wise between Florida and Auburn, at least.
All right. Just some final thoughts on this game before we give a prediction? Anybody?
Yeah, so I really think Florida is in good shape to be able to win. I have a hard time letting go of this Auburn revenge thing, and maybe I'm putting too much weight on it. And Bruce Pearl just knocking on this door for so long. I just have a feeling late in the game, Auburn's going to make a move and be able to secure the win. So I'm going to stick with Auburn, but obviously I do give a lot of the edges to Florida.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I think there's a good recipe here for both teams. But like Rocco said, I'm going to stick with Auburn. I think over the course of the tournament, they have been the more complete team. I trust them more. I think as long as, Broom is healthy and good to go, which it sounds like he more than is.
Yeah.
Auburn,
but Dickie V said that he's not playing.
Did he really? I didn't even see that.
Dickie V fell for something.
Yeah, I still think that as good as Walter Clayton has been in the tournament, Auburn has the most reliable scorer on the floor. And Broom can score in such a different variety of ways that even a defender like Alex Condon is probably going to struggle in some aspects.
I thought I would end up on an island picking Auburn. I really did. I thought I'd be the only
You have
one.
Florida as your national champion too.
Yeah, and literally since the first night of the tournament, I knew that was not happening. Give me the Tigers.
You're this could be your Houston Arizona moment for me, where I picked Arizona in my bracket and I was adamant that Houston was going to win.
Yeah, I'm taking Auburn.
Yeah, it's tough. It's a tough choice. I honestly think that this, and not to give away a Duke Houston pick early, but I really think Duke's the clear number one, and the other three are 2A, 2B, 2C. They're all in the same tier, the next three.
All right, let's do this. Next game, Duke Houston.
Don't get ahead of yourself.
Yeah.
Duke and Houston, the number 1 and number 2 teams in KenPom. The number 1 and number 2 teams in KenPom for the last whatever many years. I've seen this Duke team twice. They have outscored opponents by a combined 49 points in those 2 games. Jonathan, you've seen this Duke team
0 times.
What?
Once.
You went to the pit game and
I
they
went to
won
the
by
pit
30.
No.
So this group combined has seen Duke 3 times and seen them outscore opponents by, I believe, 77 points.
Yeah, I mean that pit game was actually a game for 20.
Yeah, and Pitt didn't score. Pitt didn't score for the last 8 minutes, and then Duke started the next game with not allowing a point for the first 7 minutes.
Yeah, against Notre Dame.
Yeah,
but yeah, I think that to jump right into it, I'm always nervous for Duke games in the tournament. Just it's how you are as a fan, but I think there is a real clear advantage here against the Houston Blitz for Duke. I think you should be able to have a ton of success using Khan and Cooper as short rollers with Kaman Malawach in the dunker spot. I think, Houston, Sam, you and I talked about this. Houston's not going to change who they are. Houston's scheme is what Houston's scheme is. And
you suggested it, and I was like, what are you talking about?
The Houston scheme is still good enough to they could, create some turnovers here. But Duke is a team that against pressure can thrive because they create so many open jumpers and they don't turn it over. So I think Duke's size advantage here gives them a real advantage in the game against Houston's blitz hard hedge defense that has been obviously a Kelvin Sampson staple for years now.
Rocco?
Yeah, I like what Jonathan said. The first thing that jumps out off the page with almost every Duke matchup is the size. There's nobody that even touches the court with a Duke uniform on shorter than 6'5". Houston starts 3 of them, and they're 2 big guys, even though they're beasts and physical. They actually have 3 big guys if you count Francis, Tugler, and Roberts, but they're all 6'8", and they have a lot of muscle, and they're not going to be easy to maneuver I'm not claiming that, but just the sheer ability to see over the top, make plays over the top, and then you flip that around defensively. It's going to be harder for Houston to get clean looks. They've had really good percentages shooting compared to most years for Houston. Obviously, with Cryer in the backcourt and the different weapons, Uzan and et cetera out there that can knock down shots in sharp. It's harder to do against Duke. Duke's got the number one defense against any kind of effective field goal. So that combines 3s and 2s and everything else.
Well,
so
I would say against any kind of ineffective field goal.
That too. Any kind of field goal in general, effective or ineffective.
They are typically ineffective.
Correct. And that's what I'm getting at here. So I think Houston's going to have a hard time, just getting any kind of consistency offensively. I think defensively, it's going to be frustrating at times. I think Duke may hit some rough patches throughout. We saw them play a low possession loss at Clemson. KenPom's only got this at 61 possessions, which if that happens, that's not going to be as enjoyable for Duke. But I just think they got the talent and the size advantage to a point where it's one of the few things that I could actually see working against Houston, whereas Houston is usually the tougher, more dependable team in almost any other matchup. So it's kind of crazy to pick against them, honestly. And you look at Houston's losses this year. There's a 4-point loss to Auburn and then a bunch of overtime losses. So they're an extremely difficult team to beat. And I understand all that. And there is a way Houston wins for sure. But I just think, Duke having the best player on the floor, the most pros on the floor, the most size, the better ball security, the better effective field goal percentage defense, even though they're the top 2 in the country. That's too much for me to pick against Duke.
I kind of think like Houston's offense is kind of pretty well suited to face Duke as well as you can be suited, honestly. But like nobody's well suited to face Duke offensively. There's a reason Duke is the number 4 defense in the country. But looking at it, Houston's offense is not based around shot quality at all. They take some bad shots, and they don't really need to get to the rim, and they don't really take a ton of catch and shoots. So Duke is obviously really good at keeping teams away from the rim and at keeping teams from catch and shoots. So that kind of cancels out. The only problem is at the rim and catch and shoots are the most efficient types of shots. And It takes getting a ton of offensive rebounds for Houston to survive. And Duke is a top 25 or some top 50 defensive rebounding team in the country. So there's not really a matchup advantage as much as it is a stylistic blend, I would say.
Yeah, Sam, I think you're right. At the same time, I do think Houston's going to be able to rebound on the offensive glass.
Oh, no, I'm not saying they won't.
Yeah, I do think that they'll be able to get in there. Like, as much as Duke has a real size advantage here, Houston's toughness cannot be ignored. And I do think that, like, Duke rebounds well because I think they're tall. I don't think they do an exceptional job at, like, team rebounding and boxing out. But, I don't think that, like, that will be what gets Houston over the edge. I think if Houston wins this game, it's going to be because they hit a bunch of, like, tough mid-range shots, couple, like, weird step back threes at the end of the shot clock. Duke is so good at getting you late in the shot clock and forcing you to take shots that you're uncomfortable taking. So I think that is a huge advantage in Duke's favor, whereas in, like, Houston has a clear defensive style that you can game plan for. And if they go away from it, it's probably not the best move. Sam, you and I have talked so many times this year about how what makes Duke's defense so special is how many different ways they can guard ball screens, where Houston only has one way that they can guard ball screens. Now, they're very good at it. I'm just saying that it's probably Houston's probably a little bit easier to game plan for if you have Duke's personnel.
Rocco, what would you say to that?
No, those are good call outs. I think it'll be fascinating to see if Houston has a alternative method to attack. They usually just stick to their guns and just try to wear you out physically, and that works against 90+% of the opponents. But with Duke, there's just a higher level of skill and a higher level of even continuity, which is really impressive for Duke being such a new team roster-wise. Only brought back really Proctor to this rotation, but it's worked well for them, and they've played so well down the stretch. I'm curious to see if Houston can do something that really throws Duke into a spiral, because I feel like if they can, that's Houston's path to victory. Eventually, Houston will get some shots to go down and build a little bit of a margin in that scenario, but it hasn't really happened all year to Duke. And if anybody can do it, I guess it is the Cougars. But that's kind of what I'm leaving the door open to see, because that if that happens, then the script completely will flip, and Duke will be the more desperate team in the second half if that can happen early on.
What do you think is that thing that could throw Duke into a spiral? I mean, I'm asking you the $10 million question that is asked to coaches that get paid almost $10 million, but
I mean, it's a little bit of a
significantly less than that, or maybe not, considering how much you fly around the country. But
I don't have and I don't have the full breakdowns versus like how often they hedge and how often they drop and things of that nature. But I will say, I know they kind of mess with both, along with some of the different doubles and switches they do. So basically experimenting with that early. And then also, a huge factor, which is a huge factor in any team with physicality tournament level game, is how it's officiated. So if they're able to do little things and knock Duke off the block, flag whoever out of position without getting whistles or picking up early whistles, they're just going to continue to do that all night long. Now, of course, if it's officiated to where they're getting blown for a whistle each time, they have to adjust, and that's not going to favor Houston at all. So it's just little things like that to where you tinker and tweak and experiment in the first, 3 segments, I guess, till you get to the under 8 of the first half. And then you kind of know what you need to do from there defensively. Offensively is a little bit different because you can figure out pretty quick if something's not working within one segment. But defensively, I think it's worth letting it play out the first 12 minutes or so to determine it, where what you want to lean on going forward as you go into the second half.
All right, Jonathan. Anything else? We haven't said Cooper Flagg's name very much.
We talked more from a team schematic.
Let's talk about Cooper Flagg. Jonathan, go.
I'm so interested to see how Houston guards him, because I don't think that
right.
Duke doesn't isolate a lot. They will with him, obviously, because he's the most talented player on the floor in any given game. But I think it's gonna be hard for Houston to guard Cooper if Duke is playing good team basketball, because they have so many threats on the perimeter. You have one of the best lob threats in the country at the rim in Malawach. Even like guys off the bench, like Isaiah Evans, can come in and knock down a three. Sion James is like built to play against Houston. Like, he's like that kind of player. Houston's kind of stuck in some like weird like no man land sometimes with like they play 3 guards and like 2 real like more bigs. Now, like those bigs can be switchable and like they can guard perimeter oriented players, but like outside of JoJo Tugler, you don't really think of Javier Francis and Juwan Roberts as like those kind of defenders.
Jonathan, this just came out right now, but Matt Rogers in that game against the Mount towards ACL.
Oh, really? That's
awful.
Shit. That's not good.
So
All right.
he's basically going to miss a
played
year
so
of
well this year.
basketball. Yeah.
That sucks for him. But he'll get back on his feet. He's a stud. Moving on. Do we have any predictions for this game?
I'm taking Duke. I just think the percentages of things working out in their favor are much greater. And whereas Houston, I think there's only a couple paths to victory, including like if, obviously if Flag gets re-injured, knock on wood, but if he does, like that changes everything. Just like it would if LJ Cryer or somebody like that for Houston goes down. I think that's the other point I wanted to make is don't forget about how last offseason went for Houston. All they could think about was if Shed would have been healthy for the rest of that Sweet 16 game, a lot of people felt like Houston would have won, and they've had Duke on their mind for like an entire year. And a lot of these guys from Houston were on that team. Obviously Shed's not back, but Sharp, Cryer, etc. were there, and they're the team with the chip on their shoulder if we want to play that game as well, much like Auburn in game 1.
Yeah, in the last thing I'll say is like in the last 4 years, Houston's really only lost in the NCAA tournament in like one of two ways. Like one, injuries catch up to them, or two, they just play a schematically really efficient offense. And that's kind of what this Duke team is. Like you think about 2022 Nova that knocked them out. I know it was a little bit injuries in 2023, but Miami, the way they played, that was a tough matchup for them.
The Miami game was nuts. Yeah.
And 2021 Baylor, the way they played was, it overmatched Houston's defense. And I think that's what this Duke team has the ability to do.
Yep, I agree. Give me Duke.
Correct.
Rocco, anything else to add before we let you go?
Let's enjoy the moment. I think 4-1 seeds, if it happened 5 years in a row, I'd be pretty disgusted. But we have it this once, and if it's only every 15 years, I think we're going to survive.
Yeah, we can live with that.
We can live with that. And
hashtag make the Final Four great again.
Especially in a year where the top of the sport is just so historically good.
Correct. Yeah. Let's just enjoy the moment. I think we'll look back on this Final Four, and several of these guys will still be in the NBA in 10 years. And, I think it'll be for what it is, right? Like we're in the NIL era. This is kind of like the new peak for now. We'll see where it goes from here. But I think we're going to get some excellent basketball, some great strategy. And if you love ball, you'll appreciate these games this week. So just embrace it.
All right. Thank you so much, Rocco, for joining us. I will see you on Friday.
Sounds good.
And I can't wait to do the podcast with Jonathan on Saturday in person. We'll get into that later, but we do have to talk women's Final Four quickly. One of the only times we talk women's ball on the pod all year. Thank you, Rocco. Jack Church is with us, the Brackets, Bubbles, and Bid Steelers women's basketball correspondent. For the 2 times a year we talk women's basketball, preseason and pre-Final Four.
Yep.
Hey,
it's a tradition.
We were here in November and we showed up in March. Well, I guess April.
No, we showed up in April.
Yeah, it still applies.
Yes, it's a tradition at this point that I come on twice a year. So,
all right, yeah. What was this the Final Four that kind of everyone wanted, everyone expected coming in? Obviously, not having Juju Watkins with the injury stinks, but like these are 4 of the 5-6 best teams in the sport.
Yeah, I just think no one wants to watch Texas play again is the one thing. But
why is that?
Because they can't score the ball and they're boring to watch. But with UCLA, UConn, and South Carolina, like those are without a doubt, in my opinion, the 3 best teams right now, considering Juju Watkins being hurt. I think all 3 of them have a really good shot at this.
And you're saying the number 10 offense in the country can't score?
It's just funny because you watch Texas and you just
okay. This is Texas A&M. I am looking at the stats right now. This is Texas A&M men's basketball. This is gross.
I've watched Texas play in person 4 times this year, and I'm trying to remember if they They played Tennessee and they didn't break 70.
That's not something that happens very often.
No.
All right. Let's talk about Texas, South Carolina, though. South Carolina, number 3 offense, number 2 defense. Really good offensive rebounding team, really good defense all around. Are they kind of the antidote to what Texas wants to do, or do you think Texas can take a little bit of a matchup advantage?
I think, considering we've seen this 3 times, that it's pretty clear to me that the best team between these 2 teams is South Carolina. I mean, South Carolina beat them by 15 at home, lost by, I think it was 4 in Austin, and then playing in the famous neutral site of the SEC tournament in Greenville. South Carolina won again pretty handily.
Noted neutral site.
Yes, noted neutral site of Greenville. I've seen South Carolina. Yeah, I've seen South Carolina play in person 6 times this year. I've seen Don Saley cut down nets twice in person this year. So I've seen plenty of the Gamecocks, and they just have so much depth. I mean, Joyce Edwards and Mylasia Fulwiley, arguably definitely two of their best players. You could argue Fulwiley is their best player, come off the bench every game for them. And it's not undeserved that the 5 starters that they have are in the lineup. It's just going to come down to, can Madison Booker get going on offense? If Booker needs to probably drop 30 for Texas to have a shot at this game, just with how many different things South Carolina can do and how versatile the Gamecocks are in this sort of situation, especially considering how often they've been to the Final Four 5 years in a row now. They're used to the moment. They've just came off an undefeated national championship season. I think it's very unlikely that Texas wins this game.
All right, moving on to talk quickly about UConn and UCLA. UConn makes the Final Four once again for 17th out of 18 years. They are the number 1 offense and the number 1 defense in the country, and yet they are a 2 seed. The only
I believe that would be Kim Caldwell's fault that they're a 2 seed. But yeah, the thing about the UCLA UConn game is it's just going to be, can UConn get all of its stars going? And Paige Beckers has been phenomenal this tournament. The 34 points, 34-point showing, the 40-point showing against Oklahoma, where she outscored Oklahoma in the second half. And then you have Sarah Strong, who just had who had a phenomenal game.
Officially, the other day, won National Freshman of the Year, Jack.
Not the freshman. U.S. basketball writers, which I voted on, voted Michaela Blake Freshman of the Year.
Okay, but there was one Freshman of the Year.
Yes, I voted for Michaela Blake's,
and I don't mind that. Michaela Blake's is awesome.
Yeah,
but it's just being the Robin on the best team in the country does count for something.
I agree, but yeah, I just thought dropping 50 twice meant you won. So
yeah, that's fair. Keep going.
For UCLA, for UConn defensively, El Alfi's going to have a big assignment in this game, trying to guard Lauren Betts, because if UConn gets in a situation where they have to have strong help and they lose somebody, UCLA has proven that they have the players that can go off. Haka has had a phenomenal game against LSU, was a huge part of that win. Kiki Rice has gone off at times this season. If you devote so much to stopping Betts, then UCLA can still score.
Do you think UConn can just kind of let Betts get hers and try and guard everyone else?
I think there's definitely a path to that. I think that if you kind of leave I don't want to say leave El Alfi out there to die, but
leave her on an island.
Leave her on an island. Let Betts get however many she needs to get, and then because UConn has no issue scoring the ball. If this becomes yeah, if this becomes a game where both teams are scoring, UConn has phenomenal chances because they have 3 of the best scorers in the country in Strong, Beckers, and AZ Fudd. They have no.
It's not just those 3. There's a bunch of other girls that can really score on this team.
Yes, Caitlin Chen.
Yeah, Caitlin Chen was the Ivy League Player of the Year last year, averaging like 18 a game or whatever it was.
Yeah. Normally I'd say Alfie, but I don't know, playing against Betts.
Yeah, Shade can score when she needs to. Arnold can score when she needs to.
But yeah, the way UConn's been playing this tournament has just been absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, I can't see UConn losing to UCLA. Famous last words, obviously.
In my bracket, I picked UCLA, but after watching UConn play Oklahoma and then USC, there's no way I can pick against the Huskies in this one.
Hey, Houston, Arizona.
It's funny because for the Beacon Bracket Challenge, we do a combined score between the men's and the women's. And in order for me to win,
Hold on. Jonathan's picture is me.
Yeah, you didn't notice that? I'm on your account.
All right, Jack, just finish.
For me to win the Beacon Bracket Challenge, I need both UCLA to beat UConn, and I need Auburn to win the national championship. So I feel like the chances of me winning are slim, but there's just no way I can pick against
who is in first place?
Sarah, who does our social media, is in first place.
Good for Sarah. Good job, Sarah.
No, she's done great. She went 8 for 8 on Final Four teams.
Good job, Sarah.
She has Florida winning the national title in South Carolina.
Jonathan, who's going to win the women's national championship?
UConn.
I agree. Jack.
That was my pick in the preseason. I'm sticking to it.
Jack, who's going to win the women's national championship?
I'm not picking against Dawn Staley in a national championship game. I'm not doing it. I'm picking South Carolina.
Well, only in the Final Four.
Not picking against Dawn Staley on a one-day scout?
I'm not picking against Dawn Staley. I don't pick against Dawn Staley ever. Especially
she is the best coach in college basketball, men's or women's.
Yes. And I think the one thing that complicates things is that UConn went into Colonial Life Arena and ran South Carolina out of the building. That is the one thing.
That game, by the way, is like carrying UConn's predictive metrics.
Yes.
We might have a Virginia Tech St. Bonaventure situation here.
With the 2 best teams in the country.
Yeah, it's a little different than Virginia Tech St. Bonaventure, I think, but you know.
Jack, do you remember that game?
I do not.
I mean, here, the difference in that game, South Carolina shot 3 for 17 from 3. UConn shot 13 of 28.
Yeah, I'll do it.
And UConn won by 29. So
is South Carolina a team that shoots though? Because like they haven't been in the last couple years.
Right? 2 years. Well, the Caitlin Clark year they couldn't shoot. Then last year they were the number 1 3-point shooting team.
Okay, got it.
And
yeah, they definitely have players that can shoot the ball. If you leave Kitts open from 3, she's hitting it.
Yeah.
If you leave Raven Johnson open from 3, she's hitting it.
I remember watching the national semifinal between South Carolina and Iowa 2 years ago, and just remember watching it, just this team's undefeated. This was the team that people were calling like one of the great teams.
That team got goat shouts. That team, yeah. But last year's South Carolina team was a lot better in my eyes.
Yeah, and then you bring in one of the best freshmen in Joyce Edwards and add it to all of that. And there hasn't really been a moment where the loss of Cardoso really hurt. I mean, in the first regular season game against UCLA, yes, but they figured it out since then. Chloe Kitts has turned into a somewhat dominant defense. I wouldn't say dominant, but a really good defensive post player. They have all the pieces here. Just, I think South Carolina definitely wants in a South Carolina UConn national championship game. I think South Carolina definitely wants to keep it more low scoring, obviously, but they can score the ball too. So,
All right, Jack. Thank you so much for joining us, Jonathan. Would you like to take us home and take us to San Antonio, where we will see you on Saturday morning at 12:30 Central Time, so afternoon?
If you came to hear about Tyler Self and where he's working, you came to the right place. If you came to hear about the Sam Fetterman and I second ever meetup, you came to the right place. And if you came to hear about the latest happenings with Caleb Grill, you came to the right place. This has been Season 5, Episode 86 of Brackets, Bubbles, and Bid Stealers. We'll see you next time.